Gives me pleasure to introduce our next speaker, India Logan Riley, who I so enjoy working with on Ngā Toki. Needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce her anyway. India brings a background in heritage and lived experience of climate injustice. She's been on the front lines of the global Indigenous climate justice movement. She draws on a broad range of experience from UN climate negotiations to hashtag landback kaupapa with rangatahi Māori and Pacifica. She's currently a researcher with Pūranga Kura and soon is about to take up a role with the Pacific Network on Globalisation, working on Indigenous Pacific economies and resisting false climate solutions. India dreams of resilient communities where everyone is safe and joyful. Nau mai, hara mai.
Kia ora koutou. First of all, thank you to everyone for being here today. You could be anywhere else on a Thursday, and so it's an important choice to be here, to learn and to connect and to continue growing the movement as Annette has urged us to. And I also want to acknowledge those who spoke this morning, and our lovely Donna and Maui. I feel a little bit intimidated and nervous, but we'll see how we go. Getting the frown from Jane. And thank you to everyone's generosity for being willing to hear my words today. And I think as well, I want to acknowledge those who have mentored me and have worked in this space for, in some cases, longer than I've been alive. You've gotten to hear from some of them today, but of course, some of my climate struggle whānau as well, from all across the motu. You've done more incredible work than anyone would ever know, and I hope one day we get to honour your stories too. So I was wondering what to say, and Annette was like, well, we've talked about the why, so you could just talk about the how, and how we do the thing. And I was like, that's a really big ask. I'm not a genius, and I'm not a fortune teller, but we'll give it a go. And of course, I cannot start with talking about where we need to go without talking about where we've come from and where I've come from. And of course, in the legendary storytelling style of Moana Jackson, to talk about home and to talk about soil that is home and those places that are home. I come from Te Matua Maui, colonially known as Hawke's Bay. I'm biased, but it's one of the best places in the world. And my whānau are embedded in the soil there in the Urupa at Te Tapairu marae. And it is where I will return to when I eventually pass as well, to return to the soil that has nourished me. Now, it's important to understand that our whānau and myself are enabled to be here and to exist because we've been loved and nourished by the beautiful plains and curves of Te Matau for over 800 years. And they did, and we were loved and nourished by those lands and landscapes and waters so that my family could love and nourish these places in return, so that I could be loved and nourished in return by those places, so that I may love and nourish those places in return, and so that those places may love and nourish our whānau mokopuna, and so on and so on. That dynamic of reciprocity, that I could not be here at all without those thousands of years of legacy, not just of people and in whānau and in that whakapapa, but of those lands and waters. And so in starting to think about where we go to from here and knowing where we've come from, some of the places that might raise us and have loved us and nourished us, we think about what does it mean to go forward so that we can set up frameworks where it is easy and enabled and encouraged to love and nourish those places. And I know we talk a lot about in the climate space justice, climate justice, justice for future generations, justice for historically oppressed communities, justice for a more than human whanaunga. And I think about justice a lot because it can get overused, it can get flung around, but it's important that we flesh it out because a good definition of justice then becomes our criteria for understanding the solutions and being able to assess false solutions against, because there are a bunch of false solutions out there, some of which, being trade agreements are going to liberate us economically, and we've just heard how that's not the case. Often I return to the quote by the amazing Dr. Cornel West, who's a civil rights activist and academic from the US, and he says that justice is what love looks like in public. Right? That love is not this passive thing that we get to sit in the warm and fuzzies of. That is something to be actively practiced, something that we can look to our ancestry, that we can see in the curves and places that we come from, and see that it is actively done in reciprocity over hundreds of generations. It is less so much the warm fuzzies of a hug, although a hug is nice, but it is the fierce love of the mother bear for its cub that calls us into the kinds of activisms and responses that are being talked about over this time. And that love has to encompass each other and our more than human whanaunga for our whakapapa and for future generations, and that is something to be acted on day in, day out, so that we can maintain that cycle of reciprocity. And I think it's important to talk about here as well that up until colonization, that we were able to act, we had frameworks, that we had laws that actively encouraged that practice of love and reciprocity so that we could maintain that balance. And I know, what Donna talked about, these negative statistics, where we've gone wrong, where things are going wrong, we've depleted the soil this much, this many of our people are in prison, this much land has been stolen. But we also can know in our memory, in our whakapapa, which has its own power and momentum, that the rivers used to be clean enough for us to swim in wherever, that we had enough kai for ourselves and anyone who showed up to the table, that none of our people were locked up, and that we restored relationships with integrity and accountability, and that has a momentum in and of itself, and hopefully the nearly 200 years of colonization gets to be a blip of, that was the bad times. And that in 200 years' time, even in 20 years' time, in the next generation, we get to say, oh yeah, we learnt and we moved. And we moved in the pursuit of justice. We moved in the pursuit of that act of love. And we moved in the pursuit of righting the wrongs that have landed us here today. Now, I'm going to take an abrupt pivot from the conceptual, metaphor, love stuff, because I'm going to honour Annette's instructions to talk about how. And I first want to say I am not the expert on how we create change. There are many people here in this room who have done incredible mahi to generate the kinds of positive impact and positive whakapapa that we need to draw on. And of course, understanding that change is nuanced. I'm not going to say this is the one thing you're going to do that's going to fix it all, right? That would be great. That would put us all out of a job, but in a good way. But it is nuanced, that there is no silver bullet, but that doesn't mean that any tactic all over the place is a good idea, that we have to be coordinated and strategic and be smart about where we apply those tactics. And I know I'm using kind of jargon here, but it's the kind of 6-dimensional chess game that we need to be playing for the long run, that the empire is already doing. Okay, they plotted the theft of land and the conquering of territories across the globe, and they resourced soldiers to do it, and they made education booklets on that, and they drove it, and that's the context that we're living in now. So that's the kind of elevating of political strategy that we need to rise to. And I know that our tipuna did that as well. One of my favourite stories from back home is this uncle who has a bunch of old brochures, handwritten brochures from the late 1800s in his garage. And that was from when whānau back home in Te Matau noticed that other whānau were being persuaded into selling their land, and they knew the selling, and I say selling like this because it was, that's a whole other kōrero. So they knew that the selling of the land was a bad move, that to sell to the crown was going to harm our people. And so they sat down by candlelight and they drafted pamphlets, and they hand wrote out copies and copies and copies to be able to distribute to our whānau back home, to push for not selling the land. And I think to me that speaks to, oh yeah, they're like, yep, we're going to do something about this. And pamphlets are age-old propaganda. We do them now, even with the QR codes and that kind of thing. And so I think, again, there's a political astuteness there when you're called to justice from looking back to go forwards towards the horizon. And that we will hold on to those core principles of looking after the land and keeping it within our whānau. Now, I think the other piece that I want to talk about here is what is required to be in relentless solidarity with each other. And I know we talk about solidarity a lot, but I want to talk about what kind of underpins that understanding, which is a concrete understanding and analysis of power and oppression. Big words. And just essentially understanding that oppression is networked. It's not just over here for Māori, it's not just over here for poor people, it's not just over here for global south countries, it's not just over here for queer whānau. That's a whole network system. So even if we're fighting for liberation for Māori, that those other pieces of the system, whether that be homophobic and rich people and that kind of thing, will come in to defend the racism, right? And so our coordination of those strategies, of those tactics, like handing out pamphlets and stuff like that, has to be an understanding that we have power with each other that are affected by these different spokes of oppression, but that we will be utilised against each other to hide the system of oppression that's already in place. And that we have to be in solidarity with each other to be able to generate the kind of power that is required to achieve constitutional transformation by 2040 and to be able to liberate the whenua and the moana from the tentacles of colonial capitalism. And I think a lot about the massive conscientising moment that's happening right now around Palestine and New Zealand government's cooperation in that genocide. And that actually we have responsibilities here at home to challenge our government to call for the liberation of another Indigenous community. Because again, it's that networking. And I think about, and this is just, I guess, another key piece is learning our histories across struggles. So go home and read up on the history of the nuclear-free and independent Pacific movement, because that kind of collaboration across islands made massive ripples to gift us what we have today, and we get to live in the legacy of that, in the absence of nuclear power here, which is incredible. We had port strikers and maritime workers striking against carrying New Zealand police to Samoa when New Zealand was the colonizer and killing their independence movement leaders. And that's what I mean, it's not just about working within our communities, it's across those solidarities and those experiences of oppression. So go join your union. But also recognizing that we have to step up for other people, not just ourselves, and that this government that has been captured by corporate interests is coming for everyone. And that we have to respond across those fronts, and we can respond when we're sharing information, when we're in relationship with each other, when we're collaborating. I think about the attack on our trans whānau and our takatapui whānau, the attack on our whenua as well. The attack on our young people as well, just the absolute hatred coming from this government for young people and future generations. The attack on fair pay agreements. There's a list. I've got a spreadsheet. It's really big. I'm not going to say it all. But that's what I mean in terms of stepping up and fronting too, that our liberation is seen in each other's liberation. But that in Aotearoa, that liberation looks very particular. Okay, it is also found in the honouring of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And that this government's attack on the Te Tiriti o Waitangi is because they want to greater exploit our environment, right? We've got this nasty piece of legislation coming through called the Fast Track Approvals Bill that's been like my political shit for the last few weeks. But they are coming for oil drilling, right? They're coming for the exclusive economic zone right out into our ocean. And part of why they're dismantling Te Tiriti is because that document was signed as a framework to protect our future legacies and to protect the aspirations of those ancestors. And so our environment will be destroyed if te tiriti is dismantled, and if we don't embrace an honouring of it that sees a place for everyone in Aotearoa, and that there is generosity in te tiriti o Waitangi for everyone as well. And I also want to pick up on a couple kupu. We'll hear David Seymour talking about everyone has individual tino rangatiratanga, that everyone has individual freedoms and rights. That doesn't actually work under tikanga Māori. Tino rangatiratanga is only defined by being held at a collective level. There's no such thing as individual tino rangatira, because we govern collectively and we govern in community and we govern together for everyone and for the benefit of everyone. And so be careful about being seduced by words like individual freedoms and stuff like that, because te tiriti and tikanga Māori were born of these lands to be able to best nourish these lands and look after each other. And so those are the frameworks that we have to uphold and understand adequately so that we can be nourished and look after everyone for future generations. I think my last couple points is there's lots of roles in the movement space, and we all have roles, but we also all have to support each other. Each role, when you come up against the coalface of colonial capitalism, is hard. It takes its toll. There are some of our activists who are not here today because their wairua and their health was so deeply affected by the mahi that they did. And so it is important to embrace this work, and it is going to make us uncomfortable. But in supporting each other and looking after each other, we can hold each other in the discomfort of that. Whether that be on the freezing cold of a blockade against a mining truck, or whether that be, giving an oral submission at a select committee hearing. These experiences are tough, but that we do have to be in them and hold each other in them and take care of each other in that. My last one is narratives. This is a really particular thing, but we need to be able to speak to our dreams and visions and aspirations, not just saying no to what is happening, but what are we saying yes to, and speaking to the love of that, just like I did at the beginning of my kōrero. And of course, the wonderful Mona Jackson would often talk about how one of the biggest things that colonialism ever took was our imagination, and that the Crown has defined a response to climate change that is devoid of imagination. Right, and devoid of really being able to honour each other and take care of each other. And we're living in the reality of that. It's not like I've got to prove the evidence, it's this, right? It is out there in the world. It is these wild weather events, it is poverty, and it is harshness and mistreatment of our communities. And so we have to imagine beyond that, and to be able to articulate that to people, not just saying, no, that's a bad idea, but what are we saying yes to? And that often, more often than not, it is mana whenua who are articulating a dream and aspiration that the Crown can't even comprehend. And Annette talked about that, and Aroha and Jane talked about that. The Crown can't quite get its head around that. But that's also part of the work, is that the Crown also needs to be a better space, and that those who don't fall under the mana whenua governance also deserve better governance than what we're getting right now. And so articulate that and find the ways of saying that, because we often talk about in the messaging and the campaigning space this idea of you affirm your solution, right? And so it boils down to don't think of an elephant, right? If you tell someone to not think about an elephant, they're going to think about an elephant. And so again, that's the importance of not just saying no, but what are we saying yes to, and holding that ground. And it is hard. When we were at Ihumātao doing the social media content stuff, holding the line against the hate and the racism that came and the disrespect that came from the Crown was really hard. Inside that media box, we are fuming. But the comms is peaceful, passive protectors, okay? And you hold it. Because again, that is what captures those ancestral stories and those ancestral aspirations that can affect people at a deeper level than just facts and statistics would motivate people. Now, my last one, as in we're going to get a little bit uncomfortable here, it's my final point. If you own land that you do not whakapapa to, it's time to return it. Kia ora.